My name is Beau Perschall. I am the Director of 3D Business Development for Shutterstock. And what I'd like to do today is, in the 10 or 15 minutes that I have, just give you kind of a high level overview of how you start to kind of consider future proofing what you're actually investing in terms of your 3D content libraries. So a little bit of background for those of you who don't know TurboSquid. TurboSquid was founded in 2000 in New Orleans, just as the dot-com bubble exploded and imploded upon itself. So we've been around for 21 years. Most of the staff, when we were acquired, there were about 65 of us. The vast majority of us are 3D artists and are very passionate about 3D. I myself have been involved in animation for 28 years. As Max has mentioned, we were acquired by Shutterstock in February of this year. So we have been going through all of the integration fun that you can possibly imagine with the bigger company and learning how to exist not as a company of 65, but as of a company of 1,300 plus worldwide. TurboSquid itself has over 1 million high fidelity 3D models that are being provided by over 70,000 artists globally. We are getting thousands of new models every week from those same contributors. And so you can pretty much find anything that you need fairly quickly through the site. It's worth noting that over half of the Fortune 100 companies are active TurboSquid clients as well at this point. And so, like many of the others have discussed, there is a dilemma when it comes to 3D content. And I cannot tell you how many times I have heard in one form or another that phrase of, I'm tired of paying multiple times to have the same 3D model converted so they can work in another experience. As it turns out, there is a lot of planning that has to go into what you're going to do when you commit to doing 3D. And there are lots of paths. I mean, if you consider the use cases, I tend to lump film, television, advertising, and print all as one, because most of those tend to require very high resolution, photoreal digital twins, things that are meant to kind of fool you to not knowing that it's not actually a real object, that it is synthetic, but that those images could be used, or those models could be used in catalogs, marketing brochures, website imagery, as opposed to doing photo shoots, commercial advertising, a number of use cases. But then you've got things like retail, which is why we're all here, is talking about the explosion of e-commerce. The idea now that you want to take a model that you may have as a high resolution synthetic, digital twin, and now you want to optimize it so that it can be performant and work interactively on mobile devices, especially, so that you can actually start to sell your brand interactively in the modern way that things are currently working. But beyond just retail, now you've got things like configurators, so that customers now want to see the combinations. If you're a furniture manufacturer, what are the finishes that this piece of furniture comes in? If you're an apparel manufacturer, what are the different fabrics and textures and patterns that I might get? Now, customers want that just so that they can make an informed buying decision. Everything that we've learned, brands also want that because it reduces the returns. So now you've got the potential of two models, a high resolution model for offline work. You've got a real-time model for retail and e-commerce. Now you've got variants within a model or permutations of that model for more real-time use. And of course, the next step there has been AR, VR, XR. All of the R's are out there too, where your customers want to be able to visualize those models in a real world environment to scale. So you can't actually just build it so it looks right. You've got to build that model correct. And then now you've got to be able to provide the specific kinds of options that your client wants. So you've got 4, 5, 6. I know that Stefan talked about, different LODs, and those are certainly important, as to all the different experiences where that 3D model can live is starting to multiply out. And so you're having to decide, what do I actually go for? And that doesn't even take into consideration the idea of the next generation. And again, the overused term of the metaverse. What is that going to entail when it comes to 3D content creation or management or the minting of NFTs or all of the things that are completely unknown today? So it's really hard for brands to figure out, how do I actually manage my content? How do I actually make sure that what I'm building, I can actually use over and over and over again? And so our solution, what we've been working on for years, TurboSquid has always been about standards. As Max mentioned, we're part of the Kronos group. It's important to us to understand how things like GLTF and USD impact the industry as it existed. Every 3D app had always been its own walled garden, but now it's all about standards, open standards. And so what we're doing is, with Project Gemini, is using universal standards. So the philosophy is simply, you build a model to a minimum set of standards driven by industry best practices. We work with companies like Weta and Blur and EA and IKEA and CNN and all of these industries to help understand what makes a performant piece of content. The idea being that once you have a core 3D model that is built out and it adheres to the standards like you see here on the right, clean geometry that doesn't have to be the super densest, but then could be subdivided to be used offline for high-end rendering or optimized downstream using something like RapidCompact for real-time work, clean UVs, texture-based materials that follow PBR standards, follow the metal rough standards. Ultimately, you get something like this. This core model can then be validated, and it can be conformed to nearly any specified output through automation, which is vital because no one wants to have to manually do that. And in here, you can see a number of different outputs, whether it's 3ds Max Arnold, the physical renderer for Cinema 4D, a GLTF, an Unreal file that is optimized and has been decimated down geometry wise. There are several results here. First of all, the 3D artists can now focus on building beautiful models. They're never going to have to worry about, how do I conform that model to an existing spec, or, export it and convert it. And that doesn't even take into consideration the ideas of what's coming down the line. They know their 3D tools well, but that's all they really want to be able to do. And that's all we want them to do, because they do produce beautiful content. The other thing is that brands get consistent results that can be repurposed anywhere now and in the future. So you can do these conversions in an automated way now, so that whether you want to pipe your content into something like Shopify or a new experience down the road, that's all available to you from one single source model. And the way we're trying to explain that is that ultimately 3D content creation no longer takes on that moniker of a painful repeating cost to those brands, to those entities. Instead, it becomes an investment in your future. I mean, you look at what companies like IKEA are doing. Over half of their catalog is synthetic, but I dare you to try and figure out which models and which images are not real as opposed to the ones that are photographed. Ultimately, it does give you the maximum amount of flexibility with the least amount of investment right up front. It's also important to note that TurboSquid does help educate those artists, and the 70,000 plus TurboSquid artists are learning how to build to our open standards as well, so that all of their content can flow wherever it needs to live. But ultimately, we want to be able to deliver that for customers so that they can make sure that their models live where they want them to live for a single source file. Of course, that also involves a delivery mechanism, which we call Project Gemini, Gemini for digital twins. Our pipeline allows users to create, curate, convert, conform, and distribute all of this next-gen content. And it uses a number of the pieces that we've developed over the 21 years that we've been around. But the ultimate goal is for us to make it really easy for users and application designers to quickly be able to ingest and use that content wherever it is. So essentially, what we're doing at a very high level is we're building and updating systems that allow you to create them. If you wanted to hire a team and actually have somebody manage that process, we have back-end technologies to allow you to do reviews on 3D model content, including interactive WebGL. We've used it to build tens of thousands of models over the past decade plus for companies like Autodesk and Walmart and others. To be able to manage that content, we've built what we call Kraken, which is our 3D digital asset management system that allows you to store that content in a cloud-based repository that everyone inside your organization can have access to share it freely, so that you're never having to worry about how do you manage 3D content, which is another kind of aspect of how do you actually kind of future-proof it, is knowing what you actually have. Being able to convert the content into the most popular formats. As you saw on the previous slide, there are lots of different file formats, and that seems to be growing even today. And then identifying which formats are required for all of the kinds of experiences, whether it's e-commerce or the metaverse or a game engine or something along those lines, whatever is important to the brand now can actually be handled in an automated way through Kraken. There's project systems that will allow you to automate the conversion, so you can generate multiple LODs from some of your models. The ability to conform and decimate those models, again, using RapidCompact for specific platforms. If you think about it, a new one like Omniverse from NVIDIA is out there. Being able to have content that is readily consumable by that platform just broadens the idea of where your content can live and be syndicated to. And then being able to distribute that content. At the end of the day, the Gemini platform is not designed to break infrastructure. The platform was designed to be kind of the connective tissue between the pieces brands have in place, so that you can actually deliver that content, again, via an API. It's all REST APIs, so that you can push into Shopify, you can push into your own store configurator, you can push that content to mobile devices for quick look and AR. All of that becomes possible within kind of the Gemini ecosystem, using 3D asset management system coupled with open 3D content standards that, being able to kind of convert and conform that content becomes the cornerstone of what we're trying to achieve. And that's actually, I think I had fairly little time, so I may have rushed a little bit. There is my email address. Please, any questions you have, happy to answer them. But like Stefan, I am a 3D nerd. I've been doing it forever. Would love to be able to talk to anybody about that.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, in the meanwhile, my camera picture has arrived. Okay, yeah, I see Pavel showing up. So maybe Pavel, do you want to start with the questions?
Yeah, of course. I have a question.
Sure.
Because of course, like there's a lot of things overlapping between us. But yeah, you know what they say, like great minds think alike. So that's probably good.
and I missed your talk this morning too. I was busy in other meetings, so I don't know how much ground that you'd already covered that I'm recovering. So
we got a recording for both of you, right?
Yeah, there's a recording. So great. Yeah, I have actually one question because yeah, I also touched on the creating, essentially one way for the artist to create the asset and then convert it into different outputs, right? And you mentioned texture based materials and PBR texture standard, which makes perfect sense. But my question here is how do you see that in terms of artistic freedom, especially with offline renders? Because as you know, there are artists that are very much focused on the, let's say, not real-time assets, but they're used to working with super high poly scenes that can render for hours. And they're used to using nodes that rely on, I don't know, like a camera angle or some other properties. Like essentially, they have way more freedom in V-Ray than they have with just relying on the texture sets, right? Even if
Sure.
they can stack them up, etc. But it's still a bit limiting to them. So like, how do you see that from their perspective? Like, do they have to adjust, or is there some other answer from?
Ultimately, we want the artist using their kind of weapon of choice. If it's V-Ray and they're using a lot of procedurals, there are methods that you can bake out those textures at the end for something that would be convertible downstream. The idea is not to get rid of the high poly, offline, beautiful photoreal rendered output. The idea is to make that content transmissible across a number of other use cases as well. And I'm sure you guys experience it as well. A lot of 3D artists are not necessarily really well tuned to doing conversions to applications and renderers that they don't know, that they don't use. And so and we've seen it, internally, that generally speaking, their conversions don't measure up. And so for us, finding ways to absolve them of that and let them continue to build great looking, beautiful 3D content is first and foremost what we want them to do. By building to that standard and being able to export their textures as texture sets, that just gives them the extra flexibility that they wouldn't have otherwise. It's hard to live in a walled garden now. I mean, it just is. Everybody, I never thought I'd see the day that Autodesk would join the Kronos group. And is adopting, Material X and USD and GLTF. I think that most of these companies realize that in order for all of us to succeed, everything has to now be interoperable, where before they never had to pay any attention to one another. Now they absolutely do.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Pavel, and thanks, Beau, for answering. Any more questions, please feel free, as usual, to put them into the Q&A section. And there's one coming in right now, saying, from your point of view, what are some of the emerging technologies with the most potential impact?
Oh boy. So putting on the fortune teller hat, it's impossible to ignore the buzz around the metaverse. And I don't like that term as much as everybody else, because no one really knows what that entails yet. There are lots of theories. There are lots of dystopian visions of things that could be that scare me. But at the end of the day, you've got to consider what it means. Artists owning their content through the blockchain is certainly an interesting aspect that we're looking at. How do you get the brands now? Because TurboSquid does digital brand management for companies like Ford and GM and things like that. How do you get them to kind of guide them into the next generation as well? I certainly think that AR is not there yet, but with processing power, doubling so quickly at this point, that it's not going to take long for things to be completely indistinguishable from the real world. And it's going to be a lot of fun with companies like Magic Leap and Google and everybody else doing kind of that. So I can't put any money down on things. I mean, you've got, people betting heavily on the all GPU world of AR and VR as well. Yes, an Omniverse. And there's no clear winner at this point. All I know is that the tech giants are all chasing it. And, when it comes to the metaverse, Shutterstock won't be building the metaverse per se, but I'm sure, like CG Trader, we want to be the digital backlot for companies and brands that want to actually be able to build theirs.
All right. And Pavel, do you have anything to add to that from CG Trader side?
No.
I lumped you in.
Yeah, like you call me 3 times, I appear, Like, but yeah, no, I I totally agree with Bo on that. Like, I think we have a common understanding of the subject matter. Like, yeah, we also like collaborate together, like in Chronos group, right? So like, I feel like we have the just common understanding. So and
Yeah.
approach probably.
Yeah,
Right,
I
cool.
definitely don't see this as a zero-sum game. There's, there are too many things to build in the world to be, to have that mindset. You think about fire hydrants, a public works thing. Which fire hydrant? Is the one here in New Orleans? Is it one in Europe? Is it one in Asia? I mean, all of the different designs and architectural ones and, things from past generations. There is an almost infinite amount of content to be built long term.
Yeah, definitely. That there's room for everyone, for scanners, artists, automated pipelines. There's enough world to digitalize for sure.
It just struck me that AI is going to play a role in 3D content creation in the future. Autodesk has had generative design for being able to build optimal kind of structural geometries. It probably won't be long where you can't feed it some ancestor types of models that are similar and have an algorithm being able to generate beautiful, nice topology, ready and performant down the road as well. So I'll add that to my answer.
All right. Yeah, I mean, we have basically now also talked about like the little follow-up here in the chat that said like we've been around the industry for some time now. Would you say 3D is the next big thing finally?
We've been waiting 20 years for that. So yes, it's about time that 3D's had its moment in the sun. That finally everybody is sitting up and taking notice.
Great. And then basically two more questions here so far. So one is from Derek saying, have you guys seen anyone designing a standardization of what a metaverse NFT will include so it will work across worlds a la Ready Player One? So far, NFTs are mostly about primitive data types, images, audio, 3D models, but don't include scripts, shaders, etc.
I am just getting up to speed with NFTs. I would be the wrong person to answer that right now. We have good relationships with folks that are very deep into NFTs at this point. It is very much kind of the AOL days right now, I think, more than anything else. That there is a lot of evolution still yet to come for how the blockchain is going to impact things. You've got Otoy with their standard as well. There's all sorts of containers to manage and make things richer content. It's a really fun time to be part of this industry because there are so many new and emerging opportunities. NFTs is certainly one of them. It's going to be tricky to figure it out. My initial reaction is, why am I buying a JPEG? Why am I buying that? And now it's like so now you're telling me I get dressed for work every day and then I have to dress my digital avatar to go into the metaverse as well. And I'm thinking about the ramifications of what that means too. I mean, there are all sorts of very strange ways that it could manifest itself. It's going to be fun to see what it does though.
I love your AOL comparison. Did someone already secure like AOC, America on chain? Like,
I don't think so. You might want to go grab the URL before anybody else and then sell it.
well, okay, so some good outcome here. So then next question is way more technical, like
Okay.
more 3D technical, maybe. So it says, instead of breaking down complex material systems such as V-Ray to simple real-time models, do you think it might make more sense to convert first into some more rich PBR standards, such as Material X or MDL, as a basic source for ground truth, and then distill simpler PBR materials from there if needed?
We are a big fan of Material X. We're a huge supporter of Omniverse, which uses MDL and is NVIDIA as well. Those are actually converging as well. Material X is a little bit more nebulous at this point. It isn't necessarily in all of the authoring tools out there, but it's coming. Open standards are going to drive the industry forward. And if people don't adopt them, then I think those tools are going to become less popular. So I certainly believe that being able to use those as ground truth. And again, you've got extra kinds of variants on a theme, in that you've got companies like Xrite that are doing scanned materials where you're getting really dense kind of data on the properties of a real fabric, a real finish, a real material, and how those translate into those. From what we have seen in early tests, some of that looked really good. Some of it was still had a ways to go. So there is still a convergence around materials, and that's always been the hardest part. But you're seeing the acceleration there amongst all of the different groups to start to get to that point, because everyone understands if the metaverse is going to be a shared online experience, you have to make sure that that content moves. So for us, we certainly believe that in both of those kinds of material standards.
Material X and MBL.